Hi, I'm Seamless, and it's Thursday, which means yesterday I should have done a new viewer track review video. Of course, there's always reasons why this kind of thing happens, but it doesn't really matter because today's Thursday, which means yesterday. Anyway, today's first guy coming up is going to be Zetasphere. I said guy instinctively, and statistically I'm probably right, but technically I don't know, so I probably should have said they. But, you know, that's just that. Burp. Think of the person has been featured on this particular show enough times, you'd think I'd know. Coming up, though, this track. Let's see what it's like. This was a really tight, well mixed, excellently produced 80% of a track. This is very strange for me because I would have made a track like this and I wouldn't have cared. So I don't totally think I should tell you I care. I guess I don't care, but I can feel a visceral lack of a lead element in this track. I think it's probably because like it's mostly during like these sort of main sections with the chords that were your mix focus, but like this sort of big curvature going on in the tone that makes these things sound like the way they do. Not just in the terms of like the actual form and kick-ass sound design of the basses in this track, by the way, really nice. Like it's just such a good tone. It's very good, and like the mixing of the effects and the blends of all this stuff is just very tight. Not to mention the drum work and how good that is. Like damn, but like the way it's all mixed in power is mostly to give room for there to be a thing in there. And if there's not going to be a thing in there, then the rest of the stuff needs to kind of fill it in, you know, kind of to do that. Like when we got to like this part, I'm missing the pendulum-esque kind of like echoed vocals and shouts and like lead element trails coming on here. But like it literally is all of that, but without it. This is what I mean by it being like the perfect 80% of a track. If this was designed to have a lead, then you've done it. Like you've mixed it perfectly well. It will feel wonderful once it's on there. But this also could totally live. This could totally live all on its own. I make sure I'm not muted this time. Good. And since I'm not muted this time, and I was muted that last time, I'm also going to use this track to talk about the stereo field the way that I meant to in that first track. Because, like, you might think a track like this, and also we had the accurately visual, of the limiter this time, which meant we got to see it clip. And the thought might be, well, you're talking about adding a lead, but where is there room to add? You said that there's room here, but where? You say there's curvature, and I can see it visually, but like levels-wise and mix-wise, how do you fit it? And the answer is mostly this. So let's talk about the vector scope. So the vector scope is a thing that's designed not just to show us very clinically like how high, like how weighted left or right a thing is, but to show it to us in a way that is the way that our brains and ears see it. Like, it isn't just that a thing is left or right. There's also this polarity business involved. And like this is just the polarity business is just the normal oscillation that we normally look at when we see like a levels meter go by, like the limiter. That's just that same reading. Only now we're getting it with the addition kind of in there with the other side of it to add together to form a square, essentially. If maximum level was applied in all directions, it would just form a square. And so then everything in between that is just kind of this like forwards and backwards, but also left and right picture of a sound. And the visual that's handy for it is to see what, like I'll play a section that I thought was very poignant. Probably this one. Here it comes. So the obvious look here is like cool. Kick and snare are like almost dead center. They're not completely dead center, but they're pretty there. Especially relative to the other things that are almost the square because they're so wide and loud that they appear as such. So the jam is that when you have effects and layers and extra stuff is that not only can you make them different in level itself, which is something that our brains can key in on as making them different. Like a thing that's the same sound but louder, like we can hear as actually being a different thing unrelated to it. Same as something that can show up here as a different shape. It could be a same sound, but if like literally if you just take a saw wave and then make one with like a Haas effect that just splits it left and right, your first instinct is just to assume that's a different sound. Even though, producer wise, it's not. But that application is the visual that shows up here. So what we want to do then is think of like, cool, like an element could be this kind of wide and then this kind of wide, but then also like that wide and that loud, but that wide and not that loud. And that's how you get these kinds of different shapes that can show up here layers wise. And you also want to have that consideration for like when you're getting to like, where's room for something? And then this was what I brought up on that other track and the last week's thing, which was that the vector scope tends to be rather the space that people tend to say exists in stereo when they say, I'm out of room in my mix. I have no more headroom. How do I make room for something? And they just respond, oh, you could put things in stereo. That makes more room for something. They never really follow through with an explanation about how the hell that makes any sense. And the way that it makes sense is that when you split something into stereo, it makes it enough different that you can turn it down. You can turn the thing down and it will still appear as present to you. It's not about like a tonality. Well, I mean, there's a little bit of that, but like it's mostly just about the fact that the addition of the stereo makes it something that our brain just, it's now more seen. It's like we added infrared to something, and if we had infrared sensitive eyes, like all of a sudden, oh hey, that showed up. Like that's kind of what happened when we added the stereo to something. And that and then how wide it is another kind of like amplitude kind of shift, and how different that is from each other helps things to feel different. And that's what the space is. That's how you end up making something like present but not too loud, so you can turn it down. Now you have more headroom, and you can get more done with less, which means you can do more, or you can do louder, either. So that's the point I brought up with that last track in that first video yesterday. The first track in last week's video. Geez, that track had a particularly pronounced, like, wow, completely flat kick and snare, really like specifically with other things. And that made it like, and it was a really perfect example of what I'm talking about. And then I kept referencing it for the rest of the other songs in the video. This is also another really good example. It could have had slightly more spread, and you will need more spread. Well, that's just, I don't mean spread as in width, because this is pretty almost maximum width. I mean spread as in difference in width amplitude, like how wide it is further towards the next thing needs to be different. Wow, I hope I made sense saying that. Okay, coming up next, we have Axe by Falling in Style. Axe, as in third act. Axe. A-C-T-S. Acts. Woo, this consonants are killing me. All right. I'm going to note that time. Huh. All right. So this has interesting choices all over it. Overall, it's great. I respect the hell out of the like progression of music and texture in this track. The sound design is also, A plus. It could use some more variations. My recommendation is honestly just to use the sound you have, chop it up, and make samples out of it. Like, and just screw with it. My track, I almost just thought it like 14520. Yeah, that's that. You know what that is. It's called The R is Silent. Was mostly made by doing that. I had like a couple actual sounds I had, and then I would do stuff like audio process stuff, sampling, like just changing the octave of the thing with different sample process types, that kind of like real basic stuff. Just chopping it up, moving it around, like putting it in the fill spaces so that it'll sound kind of related and relevant, but it'll also be like different and special, and it'll also keep the main thing special so that you can use it a lot and not get bored of it. Epic long fade out, by the way. And what? Why? So this was way too quiet. Let's talk about dynamic range and why we care. Because a lot of the language you hear about dynamic range advice would lead you to believe that you should do what this track is doing, like just have parts that are literally as quiet as possible and parts that are absolutely as loud as possible, and as much as that of what in between and as far away as they can be is better. And the idea being that like the lower the noticeable floor is, the higher the noticeable highs are, and that's true. So, but let's talk about why people like loud stuff and why the radios in particular were the ones that pushed the squashing of dynamic range. Like, what it has to do with is, yeah, there's the DJs and we play songs back to back, and there was this more about like, I need my thing to sound louder than yours. But in particular, they needed them to sound louder than the other guys on the radio. And the radio was listened to by the widest gamut of playback devices entertainment media probably ever had until like television. Actually, not even that. Like when television was new, there's like 3 of them. Well, like radios playback and speaker playback and music playback had the crap speakers, amazing speakers, and just like a universe. So there was no way to really plan for the dynamic range of what was available. But you still wanted a person to be able to hear everything in your song, and you also wanted it to appear loud. So what you do is you kind of live up near, like if you only can hear a couple bits of dynamic range, then those are the bits that you stay in. And radio playback, that's not a lot. So it got squashed a whole lot. And like the more clever you could be to move around within the squash to appear as though you are louder and have more dynamic range, you are essentially putting the dynamics into other dimensions. We are losing the ability to move so much in volume, and so we're doing all these tricks to move around in other ways that are still motion in that's tied to it, that tricks us into thinking it's louder. All that stuff about clipping, the side chaining, all the effects of loudness, like we put it there as this kind of projection to, because we're not literally being that loud. Like we're not hearing a gunshot, we're hearing an effect of one in a song, and the side chain is like coming in to blast it away. Like that's what's happening. Anyway, but this is why you shouldn't really go towards this like mega max super wide stuff, because ultimately what'll happen is like you'll hear a track that's the comparable level, and then you'll hear this one and you cannot hear this. I can tell you because that just happened. Because the last track that came on was at a level that I turned myself down to be comfortable to, and that the highs of this track are that comfortable level, but this, the dialogue of the Netflix bad mixing, I keep using them as examples, but like it's not like they pioneered bad mixing in television shows. But the idea being that like you just want this stuff to be louder, or at least just closer to this. Like what I also found interesting is that the loudness in this track is fairly dynamic itself. Like this, and which is fine. Like this is how you use it, you know. With the, like, there's not enough material in here for them to be so disparate that there could be a level that you could listen to, because it's not even about, we're talking about everyone's best performance out of their speakers. We're talking like when they turn the thing down because they don't want to like annoy someone else, they can still hear this as well as this. That is a sort of like practical benefit of something that doesn't have a lot of dynamic range, because if you can hear it at all, you can hear all of it, which is true for this part. which also still has a lot of dynamic range in it, but it's still clipping. There's clipping in this track for something that's so delicately far from itself. It's an interesting result, to say the least. Like the desires and emotions and the placements of all the stuff. Like I said, there could be more different kinds of bass, but like this is all it. This is great. I don't even care about this outro. Like I kind of poke fun at fade outs, but like I just don't care. Honestly, like a DJ is probably going to do that to your track anyway, right? Although it doesn't need to be this long, unless in songs that have kind of wonky fade out, you don't even really have endings. Like we mentioned pendulum songs a lot. A lot of those songs don't end. A lot of the songs stop, and then the ending of it is just the beginning of the next song on the album. Like the actual outro is the literal intro for the next track, and that means that the actual previous track just didn't end. Like it wasn't really meant to. It was meant to just be stopped and replaced by the next track. And considering, the way that this music tends to be played out, that's not necessarily wrong to design them for that purpose. And it doesn't feel wrong when you listen to them either. Yeah. Otherwise, though, good jorbs on the tracks, falling in style. Up next, we have a track that's produced by MBS, but is called Preachers of Hell by DSR. Lots of acronyms. 3-letter agencies, right? All right. Let's see what this one's like. After I note the time. Here we go. After I put it at the beginning, and I note the time. Here we go. All right. This actually kind of had a neat Opethy vibe to it, musically. Like, I dug it. Like, all right. These days, I'm not actually sure what people who watch my channel's opinions are on metal and their experiences with it. When I first started the channel, I had just come off, or either I was in a metal band, like I honestly was in the middle of being in a metal band, but I was not from metal. I began doing electronic music first, and then had to be introduced to metal by my eventual vocalist in a band that we formed called Krakatoa, and then God Eater, because we didn't know about the anime. But the kind of point here is the first time that I actually had him in the studio and we did work on a song with vocals in it that sounded like this, I like a little bit lost it. I had never actually heard those vocals like outside of a song. And I had only been like recently introduced to those songs at all. So I didn't have a taste for them. And it wasn't even like I didn't like them. I liked the songs well enough. I never cared before, but like I didn't have a taste to understand if vocals were good or bad. And when they're doing this stuff, it's like, but as it turns out, there's an entire gamut of quality, tone, like type, like schools of doing, like it's insane. And from like the little bit I've gleaned from my time working with like my incredibly enthusiastically vocalist friend, I can tell you that the realest best part of this track is this guy's vocals. That I honestly, fine, not bad at all. Like it's mostly the mix of it that's doing it kind of dirty, and the rest of it is also just the least fake part of it was this part of the song, which sounded fine. Like musically, again, this is all neat stuff. Like this stuff, like as a layup or something, that's great. Honestly, I don't remember. I think I saw a bunch of text for this in the VTR, but I try not to know stuff about songs before I listen to them, just so I have like my initial responses to stuff. I'm pretty sure though this had a big old explanation about how and why and when this thing was made, and it was super old. And if that's the case, then this makes a lot of sense, because it does remind me a lot of because like we have things that do this better. Like, I don't mean like, duh, we can play guitars. I mean, like, there's samples of stuff that are available that are what was probably what this sounds like, that would be better than this. So whoever would have done what this was would have just done that. And so that's, you know, the oldness of it. But, like, I remember doing this. Like, I have a lot of really bad tracks that I made with FL Slayer. I never went so far as to use, like, vocals from me, because I was never really a vocalist metal person. I had other people for that. Yeah. This is fun though. As like an update, which I vaguely remember being the point of what you said, this is cool. Like it doesn't trigger any kind of like musically anyway, it works out. Like the way the vocals are kind of hidden in there. I don't know what I would do with them though. I don't know what your tastes are like, or what you're even trying to do when you were doing them. But like I don't know. I probably like, well, okay. Something about vocalists and musicians in general is that they tend not to like to cheat. I don't know if you're one of those types, but like layer your vocals. Like I'm pretty sure the Opeth guy did. And it always sounds better. Like it's just cooler. Like it's probably an old recording and you're probably not doing that. It may not even be you or even anyone you have access to anymore. So that being the case though, like that doesn't mean you can't do that. I don't mean you get up on there and start doing them unless you feel like it, you know. Gang vocals are pretty easy. Something else about metal, like when you listen to tracks that have like Amon Amarth. Amon Amarth is a wonderful example of gang vocals, where like they like have a word or whatever that as a chant while the dude's singing. Then suddenly like the background is like, ah, ah, and literally that sound I just made is just what they're doing. They're yelling really as much as they can into a mic, and because they just do that like 3 times each, and it sounds like what it sounds like, a bunch of people yelling. But you can kind of do that with effects. Like if you have one thing, you can change aspects of them and mess with the timing. Like you can make cuts and just sort of move them around, change the pitch, change like the tonality with like format nonsense, distort it, put a chorus on it, but turn, you know, all these things. Like you just do a bunch of stuff, and like that will do enough of the job to help the weight of something. So just speaking of like restoring something or trying to beat something up, that's something I can recommend. But as a sustained effort of creation, this lives, and I'm fine with it. I have a lot of old metal, like not even real metal, like in the band, but like before I even had guitars, and like there was not good guitar synthesis back then. Not even good samples. There was good recorded distorted guitar, but not a lot of good, like, you know, a thing that would distort in a way that you could sound legit. This was not. So, wow. Like this is not that bad in comparison. Neato. Moving on, we have Red Jungle by Vaeon. Vaeon. It's Vaeon, but I like messing with names. And also I frequently don't know how to pronounce them. So you'll never know if I'm screwing up on purpose. Cool. Let me know the time, and we will see what this is like. Okay, that was extremely sick. This was really, really cool. Like, it had an incredibly cool kind of like happy glitch mob feel to it. But like, listen to me, listen to me. The feeling of these hits was so good. Like these bass hits in the song, like when the bits came, like the actual moment came down, and that, yeah, like these are really good. This song desperately needs a harder snare. It needs a really like it needs a snare that hits as hard as the first track we heard today. Like that would fill this and fit this so completely that this would be a phenom, like an actual ridiculously cool track. It's that cool. That dude pattern did get kind of old after for a second, but like literally only for a second before I started just being like, well, what's happening now is cool. Like if that snare was in there, that probably would never happen. Like this is very cool. Like good job. Wow. Hope you guys like that one as much as I did, because I like that a lot. Vaeon, y'all. All right. Coming on next, we have Fyrebrand with a track called Feel Dead. Not really like any, like there's so many things about this track that I could possibly consider to be a technical problem, but that's why it sounds cool. Like that's how cool that track is. I like tracks like that. All right. Let's have a look see. By that I mean here, a listen here. Oh, a listen here. Wow, a look see and a listen here. That's all right. Notating the time. That was sick. Sick and dope. And why didn't you have a snare here? You had this snare. This snare is not enough. Okay. This track threw me some loops. So in the intro, really good, by the way. Like, this the layout, this is very nitpicky I'm about to get at, so don't worry too much. This is fine. This track is great. But like, check out this rise, right? This rise is the snare, right? Like, that's the snare that's coming in, or some other version of it. And then in this section, there's a clap, but that's it. So I'm about to have the same conversation as I had in the last track. Like, okay, like, this could be amazing if I had. Then you throw this at me. Like, wait a minute, you had that, and wait a minute, that intro, and then when the beat broke finally, when you came back, you had showed me this. And so, like, all right, now I started to have some more questions. And most of the time, actually, this version of it has a snare and the kick. What was the problem? Did you mean to have it off in the intro? I'm asking because if you did, I genuinely recommend you don't. Like, you do have that in there. Like, it needs to, like, especially because at least if that was going to be the case, like, if you wanted the tone of this drop to not have that in there, then you needed to also not have it in here, because you prepped us for it. You prepped us for a certain amount of impact at there, and without it, it makes it feel mushy in this section. Even though, like, that could be a cool tone. Like, that last track was, like, mush central, but because it's built that way, it's designed, and it leads you there. And also, it's just super dope with the snare. This, like, it fully fills it in and hits exactly. Like, it's super cool. This beat is rad. Like, this is a rad song. So yeah, like, if you have some sort of special specific reason that was, like, the plan, like, I can kind of see where variation wise that can be valuable, but then you do it again. It gets me. It's weird. All right, feel free to answer me about that. Like, I'll have a talk, because or anyone else, tell me how you feel about that. Do you care about that? Like, I've noticed a lot of, like, straight dubby tracks do have just this kind of airy clap snap thing that, oh yeah. And you know what? Here's some tricks. Like, for all I know, you know this already, but, like, I'm gonna, for other people out there who might have a problem with stacking a snare with that kind of impact on a kick with this kind of impact. I'll show you something fun. In fact, this track might already be doing it. Let's see it. Well, in this case, it looks like it's peak, whatever, but, bam. So when I want to look at, oh, there's no way to tell here. Probably because the bass is outweighing it so much. But what I was going to mention was that if, like, basically what we're looking at here is that here's this oscillation, right? Part of this is the bass that's in play, but also most of this is the kick. And let me go back to the boof. Let's go back to the boof. Yeah. So this bass bit comes in and it has an oscillation, which means it also has a phase. And this comes in, it has an oscillation, and it also has a phase. And one thing I figured out once for doing this is that if you just momentarily flip the phase of the kick for just when it hits with the snare, it actually has more room to hit. It cancels a little bit, and it kind of, like, auto EQs them together. But this actually only works if they're kind of already, like, if there's even, like, a noticeable phase togetherness. But with something that snaps as hard as both of these things do, it's really about the phase of the snap. And if you can get them in a position where you can flip them around and kind of impact each other, then you can kind of get them to swallow it up and still add it to a level that's not as devastating at what might be a full addition of two very large peaks. And plus, then you just switch back to normal phase for normal time, so you do get the whole actual peak and don't have to worry about, like, specially phase canceling, or rather, sidechaining stuff. You do have to worry about specially phase canceling stuff. That's what we're talking about. But that's a suggestion for when you do want to try and, like, combine it. I mean, this is also very clean. Like, whether or not you did that, whatever your choices were about making this hit feel that way, like, good. And you also demonstrated, like, some higher ones and whatnot. It might even have been the same one, just pitched up in different directions. Like, the tone, like, it didn't need to be more than that for the variation to be a variation. It'd still be used. Either way, amazing track is amazing. Up next, we have Proxima by Digital Habit. Okay, we're at the beginning. And we're notating the time. Yup. Cool. Kind of Westworldy at the end there. A neat. Neat. This is really good. Okay, so this is this is an experience. Like, it's a nice backgroundy kind of thing to listen to, but this is just such a thing that happened, right? Like, I barely feel like, I'm sure you could dance. I mean, obviously it's a nice beat, you could dance this just fine, but like, this isn't like the kind of banger banging, you know? This is a story, and I like it. I like the sound design, although it does get a little like pew 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 to me, like a bit. Like, I'm just personally not a fan of being able to detect such a sharp filter, and that's just such a personal problem. Like, don't let that stand in the way of you thinking this is cool, because it still feels great. Like, a lot of most of the other times that this track is like, it's kind of not doing that, or it's hidden up by some stuff. Like, even this is a little kind of like a little bit like on the ARP too, but like, it's such, like, it reminds me a lot of the Voltron soundtrack, the current show Voltron, which is doing its best to emulate not just the old show's kind of aesthetic, but also that basically that entire era's aesthetic. And they're doing a really, really good job. The music on that show is one of the better things about it. And it, like, it does this, like, very 80s-y sort of ballady progression on big things, kind of Brian Eno-y kind of deal. And this is just good feel of that, right? Like, and it's not mixed. It's mixed loudly. It's mixed well with presence, but it's not mixed to break you. It's mixed so that you can feel it, and the parts of it that are quiet are not too quiet. It's not too far away from itself, so it manages to be a weighty and impressive thing, but also a pretty just regularly enjoyable experience. Damn. So, GG. Coming up next, we have Cyberbully by Jonny Be Cool. Still a great name. The Jonny Be Cool artist name. Okay. Noting the time. All right. Parts of the song were legitimately amazing, and then parts of the song were, what the heck did you, why? Okay. So, all right, first of all, this whole first part was mono, which, like, you apparently intended to be a trick, because you faded in with the stereo in a very kind of fun way, mostly because it took me a second to figure out what was weird about this, and then I noticed the vector scope, and I was like, oh. And I was about to have some thoughts, and it went on for long enough that it didn't occur to me that you weren't going to not do that. It didn't occur to me that you were going to change, and then you did, and so cool. Like, that appears intentional, so that I can't really call that a mistake. Other than certain intentions, like it feels clear to me that, like, the main bits were out here. Mostly this bit. Like, this stuff was like, this felt like the main element that you kind of went for and then built backwards from, as I often suggest people do. I don't know if you did or not, you might have just done this working sequentially for all I know. But I bring it up because this is where the mix makes the most sense, which is why I usually think that about stuff like this. Because other times the mix has a kind of like this also makes sense, this makes sense. This has a progression, it's like flawless. Everything out here is amazing. And frankly, its bits that show up out here are great too. But what's weird is, like, actually, this part worked. This is where's that progression that weirded me out? Actually, yeah, that. All right, that's what bugged me about the stereo, is that when you brought it back with a correction that didn't make sense. Okay, and then you did this bit, which sort of made sense. Which by itself was also awesome. Like, the where this goes and how it goes, what's cut in with it, and the sound effects, and the way it's all mixed together, and how it's mastered and hits, is honestly really cool. But like, kind of like the mono thing, it began as a problem that didn't make sense, that was then made sense by something later, and it's like anti-shadowing. It's like you're creating a problem that you're going to solve so that you're proving it's not a problem, which is fun and cool. But what happens, though, is that there's still a time when the listener thinks there's something wrong. I mean, I don't know how much about this you thought was a problem. You might have just been used enough to this that, like, how well this fit for you probably was a lot better than how it feels for me. And that's fine that I do that. I mean, that's me projecting a bit about what happens to my songs a lot, but that's generally what happens. I almost would just not do this, or if I did, I would do the higher bit of it, just because the lower bit of it doesn't mesh well, especially being the first stereo thing that shows up, because we are paying attention to it really hard, and it's what's throwing this part. And of course, the beginning part, like, it first has this kind of retro vibe, but it does kind of create a moment where listeners kind of like, huh? And then the huh gets answered, but then it gets replaced with another huh? And then you have this moment of like, because it's sort of still like really wonky, like, what's happening? But it's rad. Like, the rad meter is high on this one, so you can do pretty much whatever you want, which is pretty well a takeaway of anything cool about music, is that, like, if it comes together in a way that's awesome, there's no such thing as bad. And then after that, it becomes the raddest thing. Like, the raddest thing in the room. This was a super cool beat. I liked everything about it. I also kind of dug, like, the intro quality with the way the filter moved, and which is weird because I did just kind of mention in the last video that I don't like really obvious filters. But this is almost like a period piece from a time when this was not so much an obvious thing to do. But also, it kind of created a fun distortion in a way that is usually kind of hard to mess with. And this was mixed in pretty well. Like, it did the whippy, wappy, screamy thing in a way that didn't just sound like just another Skrillex attempt at it. I say attempt, he pretty much does it the best. But you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't just sound like that. This is actually an application of an original shown in a different and newer modern light, which is cool. Very cool. Weird heck progression that was with this was fine with it being on its own, or don't even progress it. Just have this one note that just kind of just on, and then you could do your That's my suggestion. I still have no idea how much of this was like how far you intended what you were doing, but I also love that you did that. I love that you went that far to do that to such major items. That's a thing that people should try. It's not like it was really that bad, but like the things that can happen sometimes might just be the best ever, is all. Yeah. So you guys did really good today. If you guys had any questions about this, feel free to let me know. If you would like to have one of your songs featured in this video, you can head on over to the Discord channel where there's a channel for submitting it with rules and such that you should follow if you want to be selected randomly when I do the videos on the day or the day later. Yeah. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.